This chapter introduces Clara Whitmore, the Harbor Lantern Inns, and the family that slowly pushed her out of her own inheritance. It establishes Ruth's will, Malcolm's false narrative, Elaine's silence, Nolan's favored position, and the small brass key Ruth left behind before everything changed. My name is Clara Whitmore, and for most of my life I thought family meant safety. I grew up in Astoria, Oregon, in a line of little coastal inns my grandmother built with her own hands and a stubbornness nobody could outwork. Harbor Lantern Inns was not some polished hotel chain with glass elevators and corporate slogans. It was 3 weathered buildings near the water, each one smelling faintly of salt, cedar, old coffee, and clean sheets. To strangers it was charming. To me it was home. My grandmother, Ruth Whitmore, started with one old boarding house called Whitmore House. She bought it after her husband died, back when people told her a widow had no business running property alone. She ignored them. She fixed broken windows, painted rooms herself, learned bookkeeping at the kitchen table, and remembered every returning guest by name. By the time I was a teenager, Harbor Lantern had become the kind of place people came back to every summer. Families took photos on the porch. Couples came for anniversaries. Retired fishermen drank coffee in the lobby like it was their private club. And Grandma Ruth ruled all of it from behind a scarred wooden front desk with a brass bell and a blue ledger book. She used to tell me, "Clara, property is paper, legacy is people. Don't ever let someone confuse the two." I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. My mother, Elaine Reeves, was Ruth's only daughter. Mom had the soft voice, the perfect hair, the charity board smile. She ran a community foundation that helped women start small businesses, which made everyone in town think she was born generous. Maybe she was once. But after she married Malcolm Reeves, something in her changed. Malcolm was not my father. He came into my life when I was 16, wearing tailored coats and speaking like every sentence had already been approved by a lawyer. He called himself a business restructuring consultant. He said he saved family companies from emotional decision-making. That phrase became his favorite weapon. My half-brother Nolan was 10 years younger than me. He was Malcolm and Elaine's son, and Malcolm treated him like a prince being trained for a throne. Nolan was bright, I'll give him that. But he had never made a bed at 6 a.m., handled an angry guest, fixed a double booking, or cleaned rainwater from a lobby floor during a coastal storm. Still, Malcolm called him the future of Harbor Lantern. He called me sensitive. Not cruelly. Not at first. That was the trick. At family dinners, he would smile and say, "Clara has Ruth's heart. Nolan has the business mind." People laughed like it was affectionate. When I asked questions about operations, he said, "Let's not overwhelm you." When I disagreed, he said, "This is exactly why we need structure." When I got quiet, he said, "See? Clara shuts down under pressure." Every reaction I had became proof of the person he wanted everyone to believe I was. Too emotional, too young, too attached to the past, too much like Ruth. After Grandma Ruth died, her will became the first piece of paper that told the truth. It said that I would receive controlling authority over Harbor Lantern Inns when I turned 25, as long as I completed hospitality management training and worked inside the business for at least 3 years. Malcolm was named interim manager until then. My mother was listed as family oversight. Nolan was not listed as anything. That should have settled everything. Instead, it made me a problem. Malcolm started saying the will was sentimental but impractical. Mom said he was only trying to protect what Grandma built. Nolan said nothing at first. He only watched, learning which side of the table had power. In public, they still hugged me. They still used words like family, legacy, and Ruth's wishes. In private, I felt doors closing. Meetings happened without me. Bank calls ended when I walked in. Staff updates were too technical. Malcolm began introducing me as Ruth's granddaughter instead of the future owner. It sounds small until it happens every day. One night, a few months before she passed, Grandma Ruth called me into the back office of Whitmore House. She looked thinner than I wanted to admit, wrapped in a gray cardigan, sitting beside the old locked drawer built into her desk. She pressed a small brass key into my palm. "If anyone ever tries to tell you this place was never really yours," she said. Open the drawer. I asked her what she meant. She just closed my fingers around the key and said, "Some people steal with a smile first." I kept that key on a chain in my jewelry box for years. I thought it was grief. I thought it was memory. I had no idea it was the first thing my grandmother left me to fight back. At that point, I still wanted to believe my family would do the right thing. I wanted to believe Malcolm was arrogant, not dangerous. I wanted to believe my mother would choose me if it ever really mattered. But even then, standing inside the business my grandmother built, with my name written clearly in her will, I was starting to understand something that made my stomach go cold. Having the legal right to something does not stop people from trying to take it. It only gives them a reason to erase you first. For almost 2 weeks after Grandma Ruth's funeral, I couldn't bring myself to go into her office. I worked every day. I smiled at guests. I answered phones. I folded towels, checked reservations, and carried luggage upstairs. I did everything I had always done. But every time I walked past the old office behind the lobby of Whitmore House, I kept walking. It still smelled like her: old cedar, fresh coffee, lavender hand lotion. The room felt frozen in time, as if she had simply stepped outside for a minute and would come back asking where she'd left her reading glasses. Nobody else seemed interested in the office. Malcolm spent his time reviewing financial reports in the newer administrative building. My mother avoided the room completely. She said it made her too emotional. I believed her, at least then. One rainy Tuesday evening, after the last guests checked in, I found myself standing outside that office with the brass key in my hand. It had been sitting in my jewelry box ever since Grandma gave it to me. I rubbed my thumb across the worn metal. She had held my hand tighter than usual that afternoon. "If anyone ever tells you this place was never really yours," she'd whispered, "open the drawer." Back then I thought she was talking about memories. Now I wasn't so sure. The office door creaked exactly the way it always had. Nothing inside had changed. Her blue ledger still sat on the desk, reading glasses beside it. An old lighthouse calendar still hanging on March, even though it was already May. The drawer she had mentioned was built into the left side of the desk. It didn't look special. No markings, no label. Just an old brass lock polished smooth from decades of use. The key slid in perfectly. For a second I hesitated. Opening it somehow felt permanent, like admitting Grandma was really gone. I turned the key. The lock clicked. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't even another key. There was a small rectangular tin box with faded blue paint and tiny scratches along the lid. It looked like something that had lived there for decades. I lifted it carefully onto the desk. Inside were several neatly organized envelopes tied together with cotton string. The first envelope had my name written across the front. For Clara. My throat tightened. I unfolded the letter slowly. Grandma's handwriting was exactly the same as I remembered. Firm, elegant, impossible to mistake. She didn't write about missing me. She didn't write about heaven. She wrote about Harbor Lantern. She explained that businesses survive storms because someone protects the truth, not because someone protects appearances. Then came a sentence I read 3 times before I believed it. "If you ever feel pressured to surrender what belongs to you, do not argue. Read the papers instead." I looked back inside the tin. Under the letter sat a certified copy of her will. I had already seen one during probate, but this version included handwritten notes in the margins. Most were simple reminders. Update insurance. Replace roof on Whitmore House. Review winter maintenance. Then one sentence caught my eye. "Marianne understands the full structure." Marianne. I didn't know who that was. Another envelope contained old stock certificates with the Whitmore family name. I wasn't experienced enough to understand exactly what they represented, but I knew they mattered. There was also a folded inventory sheet listing important legal documents and safe deposit box numbers. Everything was organized. Everything was intentional. Grandma hadn't hidden random memories. She had built a roadmap. At the bottom of the tin sat a much smaller sealed envelope. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to me. Across the front she had written only 2 words: Protective Trust. I carefully opened it. Inside wasn't a full legal document. It was only a brief memorandum, several paragraphs, references to another trust agreement, a trustee, additional protections, conditions that could activate under specific circumstances. It mentioned conflicts of interest, improper transfers, pressure placed on beneficiaries. The language sounded like another world. I barely understood half of it, but one thing became immediately clear. Grandma had expected that someone might someday challenge my inheritance. She hadn't hoped it would happen. She had planned for the possibility. That realization hit harder than anything else I'd found. Because Grandma Ruth trusted people carefully, if she thought protection was necessary, she must have seen something long before I did. I read every page twice before putting everything back exactly the way I'd found it. Except I didn't return the documents to the drawer. For the first time since Malcolm joined our family, I questioned whether something inside this house needed protecting from the people living in it. That thought scared me, not because I believed Malcolm was guilty of anything specific, not yet, but because I realized I no longer knew who I could safely trust. Certainly not Malcolm, maybe not even my own mother. I bought a waterproof document folder the next morning. Instead of leaving the papers at Harbor Lantern, I drove them to Seattle during my next training weekend and rented a small, secure storage locker near campus where I already kept textbooks and personal records. The rental cost me $23 a month. It felt excessive. Then I remembered Grandma's letter. Read the papers instead. I scanned every page, made 2 encrypted digital copies. One stayed on a password-protected drive. The other went onto an external backup stored separately. It wasn't because I expected a fight. It was because losing those documents suddenly felt like losing Grandma all over again. When I returned to Harbor Lantern, nothing looked different. Malcolm still smiled through meetings. Mom still organized charity breakfasts. Nolan still joked about someday running the business. Life continued exactly as before. Only I knew something had quietly changed. The brass key was no longer just something my grandmother left behind. It had opened the first door to a truth she had spent years protecting. I still didn't understand what the protective trust really meant. I didn't know who Mary Ann was. I didn't know why Grandma believed those papers might someday matter. But from that day forward, every conversation about Harbor Lantern sounded just a little different. Because somewhere in a locked storage box, waiting patiently, sat proof that my grandmother had prepared for a future she hoped would never come. When people hear that I inherited a family business, they usually imagine shortcuts. They picture someone walking into an office, taking the corner desk, and introducing themselves as the new boss. That wasn't my reality. Grandma Ruth designed her will very differently. She believed ownership without experience was dangerous. According to her wishes, I had to complete a hospitality management program and spend at least 3 full years working inside Harbor Lantern Inns before I could receive controlling authority. Not observing, working, every department, every shift, every problem. At 21, I moved to Seattle for school while spending as much time as I could back in Astoria. During breaks, weekends, and eventually after graduation, Harbor Lantern became both my classroom and my workplace. I started at the front desk, not because anyone forced me to, because Grandma always said the front desk was where you learned who people really were. Some guests smiled until something went wrong. Others arrived exhausted after 12 hours on the road and just wanted someone kind to hand them a room key. I learned to solve problems without making people feel like problems. If a reservation disappeared, I found another room. If someone's anniversary dinner reservation fell through, I called restaurants until I fixed it. If a child lost a stuffed animal, I searched every laundry cart before going home. Those things never appeared on financial statements, but they built reputations. After 3 months, Malcolm moved me into housekeeping. His explanation sounded reasonable. A future owner should understand every department. I agreed. What I didn't realize was that he never intended those departments to lead anywhere. Housekeeping started before sunrise. I learned how long it actually took to clean a room instead of how long spreadsheets claimed it took. I learned why replacing cheap towels every year cost more than buying quality ones once. I learned which maintenance requests employees quietly handled themselves because waiting for approval wasted time. Denise Alvarez supervised the housekeeping team. She had worked beside Grandma Ruth for over 20 years. She never treated me like the owner's granddaughter. She treated me like another employee. If I folded towels poorly, she made me do them again. If I missed dust on a windowsill, she pointed it out without apology. One afternoon, after I'd finished 12 rooms in a row, Denise looked at me and nodded. "Your grandmother would have approved." That sentence meant more to me than any title Malcolm ever handed out. A few months later, I moved into reservations, booking calendars, seasonal pricing, group discounts, wedding weekends, corporate retreats. I became obsessed with understanding occupancy reports. Patterns fascinated me. Why one weekend sold out while another stayed half empty. How weather affected cancellations. Why loyal guests always requested the same rooms. I filled notebooks with observations nobody had asked for. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to understand the business Grandma had spent her life building. Then came inventory, food supplies, linens, cleaning products, maintenance equipment. I discovered that a successful inn wasn't held together by fancy marketing. It was held together by people remembering to order coffee filters before they ran out. Every department taught me something different. Every manager signed training evaluations. Every completed rotation was documented. Human resources kept copies. Department supervisors kept copies. I kept copies. At the time, those records were just another requirement under Grandma's will. Years later, they became something much more important. The strange part was this. The harder I worked, the more Malcolm insisted I wasn't ready. At staff meetings, he praised my work ethic. Then he'd add something else. "Clara still has a lot to learn." During vendor meetings, he'd smile politely. "She's gaining confidence." When bank representatives toured the properties, he'd introduce me as someone learning the ropes. It sounded supportive, until I realized he never stopped saying it. No matter how much experience I gained, no matter how many departments I completed, there was always another reason I wasn't ready. One morning, I handled an electrical outage that affected nearly every guest in Whitmore House. The maintenance supervisor was 45 minutes away. I relocated guests, coordinated refunds, arranged breakfast vouchers with a nearby cafe, and kept everyone informed until power returned. Nobody yelled. Nobody demanded refunds beyond what was fair. The crisis ended quietly. Several guests later left glowing online reviews praising how professionally Harbor Lantern handled the situation. I felt proud. Malcolm congratulated me in front of everyone. Then after the meeting, I overheard him telling my mother something completely different. "She reacts well in emergencies," he said, "but emotionally, she relies too much on instinct." Emotionally. That word again. Apparently solving the problem wasn't enough. I had solved it the wrong way. At least according to Malcolm. Another time I switched shifts with a front desk employee whose daughter had pneumonia. I covered 12 extra hours without being asked. The employee cried when I told her to stay with her child. The next week, Malcolm called me into his office. "You disrupted the scheduling chain." I covered the shift. "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "You made a management decision without authorization." I walked out confused. I thought initiative mattered. Apparently, initiative only mattered when Malcolm approved it first. Little by little, patterns appeared. Whenever I succeeded, Malcolm reframed the success. Competence became impulsiveness. Kindness became poor boundaries. Independence became insubordination. The language changed. The conclusion never did. I wasn't ready. I didn't know it then. But Malcolm had started building something behind the scenes. A file. He called it my professional development record. I wouldn't see it for a long time. Inside were notes after nearly every disagreement. Needs stronger emotional regulation. Difficulty accepting organizational hierarchy. Over-identifies with staff. Resistant to executive guidance. Each sentence sounded harmless by itself. Together they created a completely different person. Not Clara Whitmore. Someone unstable. Someone difficult. Someone a bank might hesitate to trust. Someone a court might question. While Malcolm documented reasons I shouldn't lead Harbor Lantern, something else was happening that he couldn't control. The people who actually worked there were documenting something too. Denise kept copies of every positive evaluation she signed for me. The maintenance supervisor emailed Malcolm praising how I'd handled the electrical outage. Guest satisfaction reports mentioned my name dozens of times. Reservation records showed improvements during shifts I supervised. My completed training certifications accumulated one by one. Every requirement Grandma Ruth had written into her will was quietly being fulfilled. I didn't collect those records because I expected a fight. I collected them because Grandma had taught me to keep paperwork. People forget conversations, she'd always say. They don't forget signatures. By the end of my 3rd year, I had done exactly what Grandma asked of me. Every department, every certification, every required rotation, every evaluation. I believed that would finally silence anyone who questioned whether I had earned my place. Instead, Malcolm simply changed the question. It was no longer whether I had completed the work. It was whether someone like me should ever be trusted to lead. For the first time, I began to suspect that nothing I accomplished would ever be enough, not because I lacked ability, but because someone had already decided what story the paperwork was supposed to tell. By early 2023, I knew the daily rhythm of Harbor Lantern better than Malcolm ever admitted. I knew which rooms smelled damp after 3 straight days of rain. I knew which windows needed extra towels on the sill during coastal storms. I knew which guests always requested second-floor rooms because they liked hearing foghorns at night. And I knew Seabird Lodge had a roof problem. Not a new one, an old one. Room 214 had a brown water stain in the corner near the closet. Room 216 had a slow drip that only showed up when wind pushed rain sideways. Denise had reported it twice. Maintenance had patched it twice. I had personally apologized to guests more than once and moved them before the problem got worse. So when I saw the invoice, my body reacted before my mind did. It was sitting in a vendor payment folder on the back counter of the administrative office. I was there to drop off updated room condition reports, and the folder was open because Malcolm had asked the office assistant to prepare checks for signature. The invoice had a clean logo at the top: Northline Restoration, Roof Replacement and Structural Weatherproofing, Seabird Lodge, total due $48,000, paid in full. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I looked at the service dates. 2 weeks earlier. That was impossible. 2 weeks earlier, I had been at Seabird Lodge every day covering for a front desk clerk who had the flu. No roof crew had been there, no scaffolding, no dumpsters, no permits taped to the lobby window, no noise, no materials, no guest complaints about construction. And the leak in 214 was still there. I took out my phone and snapped one picture. Just one. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost blurred it. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a deposit. Maybe it was for materials. Maybe the work had been scheduled under the wrong description. But the words were clear. Paid in full. Completed. I asked Malcolm about it that afternoon. I tried to sound casual. I really did. I saw the Seabird roof invoice. Did that work get pushed back? He didn't look up from his laptop. What invoice? The Northline one. It says roof replacement completed. That made him look up. Not surprised, annoyed. Clara, construction billing doesn't always line up with what you think you're seeing on site. I was on site during the service dates, and that is exactly the problem. He leaned back in his chair like he was about to teach a class. You confuse proximity with expertise. I felt heat rise in my face. I'm not confused. The roof is still leaking. Then maintenance can file a follow-up. But if we already paid $48,000, he cut me off. Enough. You are not authorized to audit vendor payments. The word audit landed hard. I had not used it. He had. I stood there with the room condition reports still in my hand, suddenly aware that I had stepped on something he did not want touched. Then he softened his voice. That was Malcolm's favorite move after a sharp edge. Look, I appreciate your concern, but this is why leadership requires patience. You see one document and jump to conclusions. That creates instability. There it was again, instability. A normal question turned into a character flaw. I left his office without arguing because I already knew what would happen if I pushed. He would write it down. He would turn my concern into another line in that invisible record he kept somewhere. But I also did not forget the invoice. That evening, I drove to Seabird Lodge after my shift ended. The sky was gray, and the wind had that wet bite it gets near the water. I stood across the parking lot and looked up at the roof. Same missing shingles near the north corner. Same warped gutter. Same temporary patch above 216. No new work, no replacement. No structural weatherproofing. I took photos from the parking lot. Wide shots, close shots, date-stamped shots. I took one picture of the ceiling stain in 214 after the guest checked out and housekeeping cleared the room. I took another of the maintenance log showing the leak had been reported again after the supposed completion date. That was the first time I collected evidence on purpose. Not because I knew what to do with it, because Grandma Ruth's voice was in my head. Read the papers instead. The next morning, Denise found me in the linen room. She closed the door behind her. That was unusual. Denise did not do drama. She did not whisper. She did not waste words. "You asked Malcolm about Northline," she said. I froze. "How did you know?" "He asked me whether you'd been talking to maintenance." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I said you talk to everyone because you actually work here." For the first time all day, I almost smiled. Then Denise pulled a folded envelope from her cardigan pocket and handed it to me. Inside were printed photos. Seabird Lodge roof. Different angles, different dates. Some were from before the invoice date, some were from after. They all showed the same thing. No replacement, no completed repair, nothing close to $48,000 of work. "I took these for my own records," Denise said. "Your grandmother taught me to document property issues before they became insurance problems." I looked down at the photos. "You think the invoice is fake?" Denise's face did not change. "I think if a roof gets replaced, the roof should look replaced." That was Denise. Dry as sandpaper, clear as glass. She told me maintenance had never met anyone from Northline Restoration. No vendor had checked in. No contractor had requested access. No crew had signed the property log. Seabird Lodge required vendor sign-ins for insurance reasons. And there was no Northline entry anywhere. That mattered. It meant the issue was not only what I saw. There were missing operational records, too. I asked Denise why she was helping me. She looked toward the hallway before answering. "Because Ruth built this place straight, and because Malcolm keeps acting like anyone who remembers that is a problem." I put the photos back in the envelope carefully. Something shifted in me then. Until that point, Malcolm's behavior had felt personal. Cruel, maybe. Manipulative, definitely. But still centered on me. This was different. This was company money. This was property documentation. This was a paid invoice for work that appeared not to exist. I went home that night and opened a folder on my laptop. I named it Seabird Roof. Then I created subfolders: invoice, photos, maintenance log, vendor records. I scanned Denise's pictures. I uploaded my own. I typed a timeline from memory while the details were fresh. Date invoice issued, date marked completed, dates I was on site, dates leak was still active, names of employees who could confirm no roof crew had arrived. It felt excessive. It also felt necessary. The next day, I looked up Northline Restoration through the Oregon Business Registry. The company existed. Barely. It had been formed 6 months earlier. No real website, no contractor portfolio, no reviews. The registered address was not an office. It was a commercial mailbox in Salem. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the registry page for a long time. One invoice could be a mistake. A fake-looking vendor with a mailbox address was something else. I printed the registry record and added it to the folder. Then I made a second copy on an external drive. For the first time, I understood that evidence was not one dramatic discovery. It was a chain. One paper led to one photo. One photo led to one missing log. One missing log led to one strange company. And one strange company raised a question I was afraid to answer. If Malcolm was willing to pay $48,000 for a roof that had never been replaced, what else had he already moved where no one was looking? I did not confront him again, not then. I kept working. I kept smiling at guests. I kept answering phones like nothing had changed. But something had changed. From that point on, I stopped asking myself whether Malcolm respected me. That question suddenly felt too small. Now I needed to know whether the man managing my grandmother's business was quietly draining it while telling everyone I was the danger. For almost a week after finding the North Line invoice, I forced myself to act exactly the same. I greeted guests with the same smile. I finished my shifts. I attended department meetings. I even sat through one of Malcolm's speeches about financial discipline without letting my expression change. That part was harder than I expected. Once you see one lie, you start hearing everything differently. Still, I knew I couldn't afford to become suspicious in public. If Malcolm believed I was looking into company records, every door would close. So I waited. Not for another mistake, for another pattern. The opportunity came from someone I had trusted long before I trusted spreadsheets. Omar Patel worked as Harbor Lantern's part-time accountant. He wasn't the chief financial officer. We didn't even have one. Omar came in 3 days a week, reconciled accounts, prepared quarterly summaries, and quietly fixed bookkeeping errors before they became expensive. He had worked with Grandma Ruth for nearly 15 years. Grandma once told me, "If Omar says a number feels wrong, listen before you argue." I remembered that. One afternoon, I found him alone in the small accounting office reviewing vendor payments. "I have a question," I said. He smiled without looking up. "You usually have several." "I found an invoice that doesn't make sense." That finally got his attention. I slid the copy of the North Line restoration invoice across his desk. He read it once, then again. His eyebrows narrowed just enough for me to notice. "I don't remember this contractor." "Neither does maintenance." He leaned back in his chair. "That doesn't automatically mean anything." "I know. But it feels wrong." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's where you start." Omar didn't offer me confidential records. He was far too careful for that. Instead, he showed me something I already had permission to see as part of my management training: the quarterly expense summaries, department spending, vendor categories, budget comparisons. Nothing confidential beyond my training access, nothing improper. But when you know what you're looking for, ordinary reports begin telling extraordinary stories. North Line restoration appeared only once. $48,000. No previous work, no later work, no maintenance history, just one large payment. That alone was unusual. Then Omar pointed at another line. Reeves Strategic Solutions, Consulting Services, $31,000. I looked at him. "Isn't that Malcolm's company?" Omar hesitated. "It shares the same registered business address." That wasn't an answer. It didn't have to be. I knew what it meant. I had seen Malcolm's business cards. Same address, same suite number, same company. I stared at the report. So Harbor Lantern paid Malcolm's consulting company? For operational review. What operational review? Omar folded his hands. "I've never been invited to one." Neither had I. A strange feeling settled over me. The roof invoice had bothered me because something physical hadn't happened. This was different. This was money leaving one pocket and quietly entering another. Legally, maybe there was an explanation. Ethically, I wasn't so sure anymore. Before I left, Omar said something I never forgot. "Clara." I stopped. "Don't assume intent." "I won't. But don't ignore patterns either." That night, I opened my evidence folder again. I created a new section, Vendor Relationships. The next few days, I stayed within my normal responsibilities while paying closer attention to names that appeared in meeting packets, invoices, purchase requests, and budget summaries that crossed my desk during management training. One name appeared more often than it should have. Blue Horizon Creative. The description varied: marketing, brand development, digital strategy. Website optimization. Total payments over the previous year, $72,000. I had never heard anyone from Harbor Lantern mention them. No meetings, no presentations, no marketing campaigns, nothing. Curious, I searched the company online after work. Their website looked polished enough, but the portfolio was surprisingly thin. Most projects were less than a year old. Then I clicked the staff page. One photograph made my stomach tighten. The creative director was Ethan Brooks. I knew Ethan, not personally. He had been Nolan's closest friend since high school. They played baseball together, vacationed together, celebrated birthdays together. 2 months earlier, I'd watched Ethan drinking beer in our backyard during Nolan's graduation party. Now Harbor Lantern had paid his company $72,000. Maybe Ethan had simply built a successful agency. Maybe. But now I had 3 unusual pieces connected to the same family. Northline, Reeves Strategic Solutions, Blue Horizon Creative. Different companies, different invoices, same circle of people. I printed everything I could legally access. Nothing confidential. Only public business registrations and reports already available to me. The next surprise arrived without me searching for it. A week later, Denise walked into the laundry room holding a clipboard. "Thought you'd want this." She handed me a vendor sign-in log. I was cleaning old files. I looked down the pages. Delivery companies, fire inspection, pest control, HVAC maintenance. Every outside contractor who entered Harbor Lantern signed these logs. Every one, except Northline Restoration. Their name never appeared, not once. I compared dates carefully. The supposed roof replacement happened during a period when absolutely no contractor had signed into Seabird Lodge. That eliminated another possible explanation. No crew had simply forgotten. No one had ever arrived. I scanned the log that evening. Then I added another timeline. Invoice, roof photos, vendor registry, sign-in records, consulting payments, marketing payments. The picture was still incomplete, but it was growing. One Saturday afternoon, I overheard Nolan talking near the marina with 2 friends. They didn't see me loading supplies into my car. Ethan was standing beside him. Nolan laughed. "Dad says once everything's reorganized, Harbor Lantern will finally be run like a real business." Ethan grinned. "Good timing." Nolan shrugged. "Yeah, we've got a lot of projects lined up." Projects. Plural. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. For the first time, I wondered whether Nolan understood more than he pretended. Until then, I had blamed Malcolm almost entirely. Nolan had always seemed like the kid who benefited without asking questions. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe he wasn't simply standing beside Malcolm. Maybe he was already standing inside the plan. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not because Nolan and I had ever been especially close, but because I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike when he was 6. I remembered taking him to the aquarium, helping him with homework, buying him birthday presents after Grandma died because I knew Mom was overwhelmed. Somewhere along the way, the little brother I thought I was protecting had become someone quietly benefiting from the future that was supposed to be mine. I didn't accuse him. I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't tell Omar everything I had found. Instead, I went home, opened my growing folder, and started drawing lines across a blank sheet of paper. Northline Restoration. Arrow, Commercial Mailbox. Arrow, Family Connection. Reeves Strategic Solutions. Arrow, Malcolm. Blue Horizon Creative. Arrow. Ethan Brooks. Arrow. Nolan. For the first time, I stopped looking at each payment as an isolated transaction. I started looking at relationships. Money wasn't just disappearing. It was moving. Moving through companies connected to people Malcolm trusted. Moving away from Harbor Lantern. Moving quietly enough that nobody questioned where it finally landed. Grandma Ruth had always said that numbers tell stories. That night, I realized they also reveal loyalties. And the deeper I followed those numbers, the harder it became to believe Malcolm was making careless business decisions. This looked organized, deliberate, personal. I still didn't know exactly what he was building, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The false roof invoice had never been the destination. It had simply pointed me toward the road the money had been traveling all along. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Malcolm called it a family strategy session, not a legal meeting, not a board meeting, a family strategy session. That wording mattered. It made the whole thing sound softer than it was. He chose the small conference room above the main office at Harbor Lantern, the one with framed photos of Grandma Ruth cutting ribbon at Whitmore House back in the 80s. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting with a box of tissues beside her purse. Nolan sat across from her in a navy blazer, looking like he had practiced seriousness in a mirror. Malcolm stood at the head of the table. In front of him were 4 black folders, one for each of us. I knew before I sat down that something had been decided without me. Malcolm smiled. "Clara, thank you for coming in with an open mind." I had not said a word yet. That was his first move. If I disagreed later, he could say I had refused to be open-minded. I sat down and opened the folder. The title page read, Family Continuity Agreement. Under that, in smaller print, Reeves Coastal Holdings Transition Structure. I read the first paragraph twice, then the second. Then I stopped reading like a daughter and started reading like someone trying to survive a trap. The agreement said I would transfer my voting authority in Harbor Lantern Inns to Reeves Coastal Holdings for 20 years. Malcolm would serve as executive manager. Nolan would be appointed operational successor. My role would become heritage advisor, which sounded respectful until I realized it had no real authority. In exchange, I would receive a settlement payment of $240,000, paid in installments over 5 years, conditioned on cooperation. I looked up slowly. "You want me to give up voting control for 20 years? Malcolm folded his hands. "Not give up. Stabilize." "That's not what this says. It's a modern structure. The language sounds more severe than the reality." Nolan leaned back in his chair. "It's pretty standard, Clara." I looked at him. "You've read this?" He didn't answer right away. That told me enough. My mother reached across the table, her eyes already wet. "Honey, please listen before reacting." That hurt more than Malcolm's document. Before reacting. As if my first response to being erased should have been politeness. Malcolm launched into a presentation. He had charts, projections, risk categories, words like liquidity, modernization, debt exposure, management continuity. He said Harbor Lantern was charming but financially fragile. He said nostalgia could not pay vendors. He said banks needed confidence. Then he said the sentence he had clearly practiced. "Ruth built something beautiful, but beauty alone is not a succession plan." I felt my jaw tighten. He kept going. According to him, Reeves Coastal Holdings would protect the business from emotional decision-making. Nolan would bring financial discipline. My mother would preserve the family voice. I would represent heritage. Heritage, not leadership, not ownership, a decorative word for someone being pushed out. I asked one question. "What valuation did you use to calculate $240,000? Malcolm paused, only for half a second, but I saw it. "The current business condition. That's not a valuation method. It reflects risk." "From whose report?" Nolan jumped in. "Clara, you're getting hung up on technicalities." "No, I'm asking what my inheritance is being valued against." Malcolm's voice cooled. "This is exactly the concern. You interpret collaborative planning as an attack." I opened the document again and turned pages until I found the settlement schedule. The payment was not even immediate. It could be withheld if I publicly criticized management or interfered with strategic decisions. In plain English, they wanted to buy my silence with my own inheritance. I had prepared myself for many things by then. Deflection, condescension, more false notes about my attitude. But seeing the plan printed in clean legal formatting did something to me. It made the betrayal official. My mother started crying harder. "We are trying to keep this family together," she said. "No," I said quietly. "You're asking me to sign away what Grandma left me." Her face crumpled, but she did not deny it. Nolan leaned forward. You keep saying Grandma like she wanted the place stuck in the past forever. Dad is the reason Harbor Lantern is still standing. I stared at him. Dad? I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Malcolm married into this family. Grandma built Harbor Lantern before he ever walked through the door. Nolan's face flushed. That attitude is why people worry about you leading. There it was. The family line. Question the document, and I was unstable. Question the money, and I was emotional. Question Malcolm, and I was attacking the family. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. Not the evidence folder. Not yet. Just one document I had requested quietly from a commercial broker in Portland. A preliminary valuation based on property, revenue history, local market conditions, and the value of the land near the waterfront. I slid it onto the table. Harbor Lantern is worth more than $5.6 million. The room went silent. My mother stopped crying. Nolan looked at Malcolm. Malcolm did not look surprised. That was the second thing I noticed. He knew. He had known exactly how low the offer was. He picked up the valuation summary and scanned the first page. This is informal. So is your family strategy session. His eyes hardened. The mask slipped just enough. You are not equipped to understand the liabilities attached to these assets. Then explain them. I just did. No. You gave me fear and a pen. For the first time in that room, nobody spoke. I could feel my hands shaking under the table, but my voice stayed steady. I pushed the black folder back toward Malcolm. I'm not signing this. My mother whispered my name like I had broken something precious. Nolan shook his head. You're going to make everyone pay for your ego. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at Malcolm. No, I'm refusing to let you make me disappear. Malcolm closed the folder slowly. That was somehow worse than if he had yelled. Then we'll need to consider other options. He said it calmly, professionally, like he was discussing a vendor contract, but I heard the threat underneath. That meeting changed everything. Before that day, Malcolm had hidden behind concern. He had acted like every limitation placed on me was temporary. Every insult was guidance. Every exclusion was protection. Now I had the document. A real document. A signed, if I let it happen, path to remove me from control for 20 years. And the settlement amount proved something else. This was not a misunderstanding about management. It was an attempt to buy a multi-million-dollar inheritance for $240,000 and a fake title. I left the conference room with the unsigned agreement in my bag because Malcolm had given each of us a copy. Maybe he thought I would take it home, cry, and come back obedient. Instead, I scanned every page that night. I saved the broker's valuation beside it. Then I created a new folder. Reeves Coastal Holdings. For the first time, my evidence was no longer just about money moving in the dark. It was about where that money was trying to lead. A roof invoice had shown me something was wrong. The vendor records had shown me people were connected. The payments had shown me money was being redirected. But this agreement showed me the destination. Malcolm was not just draining Harbor Lantern. He was building a paper bridge from my grandmother's business to his own company, his own son, his own future. And I was supposed to smile, sign, and call it family. The first thing Malcolm took from me was access. Not all at once. That would have looked too obvious. The Monday after the family meeting, I tried logging into the property management system to review weekend occupancy reports. My password failed. I typed it again. Failed. I called the office assistant, assuming there had been a system update. She sounded uncomfortable. Malcolm asked IT to adjust permissions. Adjust them how? I think you need to speak with him. That was the new pattern. Nobody wanted to be the person who told me what had changed. They just pointed me back to Malcolm. When I found him in the administrative office, he acted surprised. Oh, right, temporary restriction. Why? During review. What review? He set down his pen and looked at me with that calm, patient expression I had started to hate. Clara, after last week, we need to evaluate whether your current level of system access is appropriate. Because I wouldn't sign away my voting rights? Because you became combative in a strategic meeting. Combative. I had asked questions. I had refused to sign. Now that was combative. 2 days later, payroll notified me that part of my pay was being held pending classification review. I had worked the hours. I had submitted the timesheets. But Malcolm claimed some of my duties were ownership preparation activities rather than compensable operational work. It was ridiculous. It was also effective. My rent did not care whether Malcolm used sophisticated words. My car insurance did not care that my stepfather was punishing me through payroll. For the first time, I understood how financial pressure could make a person sign something they knew was wrong just to breathe again. I still did not sign. So, Malcolm escalated. The next document came from the bank, not directly to me. Omar saw a reference to it in a routine finance packet and warned me that my name had appeared in correspondence about succession risk. I had no right to see the bank's full internal file, but I was copied later on a formal letter Malcolm sent to our lending officer. He wrote that while I remained a named beneficiary under Ruth's estate plan, there were serious concerns regarding my readiness to assume authority. He cited emotional volatility, resistance to executive guidance, disruption of internal processes, failure to respect management hierarchy. Every phrase felt familiar, because I had heard versions of them for years. Now they were in a letter to a bank. That changed everything. A family insult hurts. A bank letter can cost you control. I printed the copy and added it to my folder. Then came the memo from my mother. It was titled Family Oversight Concern Regarding Clara Whitmore, Elaine Reeves, my mother. Her signature at the bottom. The memo said she was worried about my ability to handle high-pressure decisions. It said I over-identified with employees, became defensive when questioned, and had shown inconsistent judgment during succession discussions. I read it standing in my kitchen. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember my hand going cold around the paper. I remember thinking there must be a second page where she defended me. There wasn't. My mother had not just believed Malcolm. She had put her belief in writing. I called her that night. She answered on the third ring. "Mom, why did you sign this?" Silence. Then a tired sigh. "Clara, Malcolm said the bank needed reassurance that we were managing the transition responsibly. By telling them I'm unstable? That's not what it says. It says I can't handle pressure. It says there are concerns. Your concerns are his." She did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I'm trying to keep this family from falling apart." "No," I said. "You are helping him build a file against me." She started crying. A year earlier, that would have made me apologize. This time, I stayed quiet. Her tears no longer erased her signature. A few days later, I learned there was another document. This one was worse. Malcolm had obtained what he called a professional behavioral consultation from Dr. Leland Price, a psychologist he knew through business networking events. It was not a formal evaluation. I had never met Dr. Price. He had never spoken to me, tested me, or asked for my consent. But his letter still existed. Based on collateral information provided by family leadership, he wrote that I appeared to demonstrate stress-reactive decision patterns and possible impairment in objective judgment during high-conflict ownership transitions. Possible. Appeared. Collateral information. Enough distance to avoid responsibility. Enough implication to damage me. Malcolm attached it to his internal performance file. That was when Omar quietly confirmed what I had feared. The performance file was not casual. It was organized, chronological, labeled. My shift changes, my questions about invoices, my refusal to sign the family continuity agreement, my conversations with employees. Every moment where I had acted like someone with a stake in Harbor Lantern had been reframed as evidence that I should not be trusted with one. The false narrative had grown teeth. It could now bite in boardrooms, banks, and maybe even court. I stopped sleeping well after that, not because I believed the file was true, because I knew lies become dangerous when they are formatted professionally. Malcolm did not need everyone to hate me. He only needed enough people to hesitate. Enough hesitation could delay my authority. Enough delay could push me back to the table. Enough pressure could make that $240,000 settlement look like escape. That was the design. I sat on the floor beside my bed that night with every document spread around me. The unsigned agreement, the bank letter, my mother's memo, the behavioral consultation, the payroll notice, the training records that proved I had done the work, the positive evaluations Malcolm never mentioned. 2 stories were now sitting in front of me. One story said I was prepared, experienced, and legally positioned to inherit. The other said I was emotional, disruptive, and unsafe under pressure. Only one of those stories was true, but Malcolm was making sure his version had signatures. I opened the storage inventory Grandma Ruth had left in the tin box and read the name again. Mary Ann Cole. Until that moment, she had been a mystery from my grandmother's papers, a name I kept meaning to look up. Now she felt like the only adult left connected to Ruth who had not been touched by Malcolm's version of events. I found her number through an old estate letter. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long time. Calling her meant admitting this was bigger than family conflict. It meant admitting my mother might not protect me. It meant admitting Grandma had been right to leave instructions for a fight she hoped I would never face. The next morning, before my shift, I called. When Mary Ann answered, her voice was steady and formal. "This is Mary Ann Cole." I looked at the documents on my kitchen table. Then I looked at the brass key beside them. "My name is Clara Whitmore," I said. "Ruth Whitmore was my grandmother. I think someone is trying to take Harbor Lantern from me." There was a brief pause. Then Mary Ann said, very quietly, "I wondered when you would call." Mary Ann Cole's office overlooked the Columbia River, only a few blocks from the courthouse in downtown Astoria. It wasn't the kind of place that impressed people with expensive furniture or polished marble floors. There were books everywhere. Probate law, estate planning, family business governance. Framed newspaper clippings hung beside certificates that had clearly been there for decades. The receptionist smiled politely. "Ms. Cole is expecting you." That surprised me. When I stepped inside, Mary Ann stood from behind her desk before I could introduce myself. "You have Ruth's eyes," she said. There was no hesitation. No confusion. She already knew exactly who I was. We shook hands, and before either of us sat down, she noticed the document case I carried. "You brought the box." I nodded. I wasn't sure what mattered. She smiled gently. With Ruth, everything mattered. For the next hour, I laid every document across her conference table. The certified copy of the will, the handwritten letter addressed to me, the stock certificates, the inventory sheets, the folded memorandum marked Protective Trust. Mary Ann never rushed. She read every page carefully, occasionally making small notes on a legal pad. Finally, she removed her reading glasses. "I've been waiting a long time to see these again." "You knew about them?" "I helped draft some of them." That answer stopped me cold. "You did?" She nodded. "Your grandmother asked me to keep a professional distance after the estate plan was finalized. She believed that if I stayed visible in the family's affairs, someone might start asking questions before it became necessary." "So she expected—" She hoped she was wrong. Mary Ann folded her hands. But she prepared in case she wasn't. She opened the memorandum marked Protective Trust. "This," she said, "is not the trust itself." "What is it?" "A roadmap." She explained that Grandma Ruth had created 2 different legal structures. The first was the will I already knew. It transferred Harbor Lantern to me once I completed my education and fulfilled 3 years of operational service. The second was something entirely different. A protective trust. It held an additional 18% ownership interest that was intentionally separated from the rest of the estate. I frowned. Why split it? Because Ruth worried that someone might try to control the business before you could. Mary Ann stood and retrieved a binder from a nearby shelf. She opened it to several highlighted pages. "The trust wasn't designed to reward you. It was designed to protect Harbor Lantern." She pointed to several provisions. if the interim manager entered transactions that benefited himself at the company's expense, if assets were transferred to related parties without proper disclosure, if false financial information was knowingly used to influence ownership, if the primary beneficiary was pressured or coerced into surrendering legal rights, then the independent trustee had authority to intervene. Not immediately, not emotionally, legally. I read each paragraph twice. Every sentence felt strangely familiar. The fake roof invoice, the consulting payments, the settlement agreement, the pressure to sign. I looked up. These aren't hypothetical anymore. No, Marianne said quietly. They aren't. But if this exists, why can't we stop Malcolm today? She leaned back in her chair. Because suspicion isn't evidence. That wasn't the answer I wanted. She continued anyway. Courts don't remove fiduciaries because something feels wrong. They remove them because facts prove misconduct. I stared at the papers. So everything I've collected is a beginning? Not enough? Not yet. She began sorting my documents into separate piles: vendor relationships, corporate governance, employment retaliation, inheritance rights, operational records. Watching her work was like watching someone assemble a puzzle I hadn't realized was already taking shape. The roof invoice belongs here, she said. The payroll reduction goes here. The proposed voting transfer belongs with coercion. The bank correspondence belongs under misrepresentation. Nothing was random anymore. Each document had a legal purpose. Each piece answered a different question. What about the performance file? I asked. If Malcolm has one, we obtain it later. And if he destroys it? Marianne gave me a look that reminded me very much of Grandma Ruth. People who build false records rarely stop building them. That sentence stayed with me. She reached into another folder. I also want you to know someone else's name. She wrote it on a yellow legal pad. Judith Crane. Who's that? The independent trustee. I've never heard of her. You weren't supposed to. Marianne explained that Judith had spent years as a probate judge before retiring. She had agreed to oversee the protective trust because Ruth wanted someone completely outside the family. No financial relationship. No emotional relationship. No personal loyalty. Only legal responsibility. So Judith decides whether the trust is activated? No. She determines whether the conditions appear to exist. And then the courts become involved. That distinction mattered. Nobody could simply declare Malcolm guilty. There had to be evidence, documentation, procedure. I suddenly understood why Grandma Ruth had emphasized paperwork throughout my life. Not because paper was more important than people, because paper survives arguments. Marianne slid every document back toward me. I need you to do something difficult. What? Be patient. I almost laughed. I've been patient for years. I know. But now your patience has a purpose. She leaned forward. Do not accuse Malcolm. Do not threaten him. Do not let him know you've connected these documents. Let him continue believing you are reacting emotionally. I frowned. Why? Because people who think they've already won become careless. That was the first time I saw the entire situation differently. Until then, I had been trying to defend myself. Marianne was teaching me how to build a case. Before I left, she handed me a clean folder with colored divider tabs. Organize everything. Every invoice. Every letter. Every memo. Every conversation you can document. When this reaches court someday, chronology will matter. I stood, gathering my papers. At the door, Marianne spoke one last time. Your grandmother didn't leave you a hidden fortune. She paused. She left you time. Driving home that afternoon, the brass key sat on the passenger seat beside the document case. A week earlier, it had felt like a keepsake. Now it represented something much larger. It had opened a drawer. The drawer had led to the documents. The documents had led to the trust. The trust had led to an independent trustee. And for the first time since Malcolm began rewriting my place in the family, I wasn't simply reacting to what he did. I was learning how to prepare for what came next, carefully, legally, and one piece of evidence at a time. After meeting Marianne Cole, I stopped thinking like a daughter trying to be believed. I started thinking like someone whose truth would eventually have to stand under fluorescent lights in front of lawyers with every detail challenged. That changed everything. Before Marianne, my evidence folder had been emotional protection. It helped me feel less crazy. It reminded me that Malcolm's version of reality was not the only one. After Marianne, the folder became something else, a legal record. She was very clear with me. Do not take anything you are not allowed to access. That frustrated me at first. Malcolm had already used private family pressure, bank letters, and business documents against me. Part of me wanted to grab every file I could before he hid them. Marianne shut that down immediately. If we build this wrong, he will make the case about you instead of what he did. That sentence kept me careful, so we built it right. I only saved documents I received through my role, documents already copied to me, public registry records, personal communications, or materials employees gave voluntarily from their own records. If someone had access because of their job, Marianne made sure their statement explained how and why. No guessing, no hacking, no dramatic break-ins, just clean facts. Denise was the first to sign a statement. She came to Marianne's office on her lunch break, still wearing her housekeeping supervisor jacket. She looked uncomfortable in the conference room, like the leather chairs might charge her rent if she sat too long. Marianne asked her to explain what she knew about the Seabird Lodge roof. Denise did not exaggerate. That made her stronger. She stated that she had submitted maintenance complaints before and after the supposed repair date. She confirmed no roof crew had checked in. She attached copies of property logs and dated photos. She explained Harbor Lantern's vendor sign-in policy and why outside contractors could not access guest areas without documentation. Then Marianne asked, "Why did you keep these records?" Denise answered, "Because Ruth Whitmore taught us that property doesn't maintain itself, and memories don't count as maintenance." I almost cried right there. Not because the statement was dramatic, because it was Ruth, still moving through people who had worked beside her. Omar was more cautious. He had more to lose. He worried Malcolm would accuse him of violating confidentiality or blame him for not catching issues earlier. Marianne walked him through exactly what he could provide. Not privileged banking information, not locked executive files, only summaries and reconciliations he had prepared in the normal course of work, plus a written explanation of why certain vendor payments appeared unusual based on Harbor Lantern's own records. Omar created a table. Vendor, amount, purpose listed, known relationship, operational record supporting work, missing documentation. The table was plain, almost boring. That made it devastating. North Line restoration, $48,000, roof replacement, no vendor sign-in, no permit record in company file, no completed work observed, registered to an address linked to Malcolm's cousin. Reeves Strategic Solutions, $31,000, operations review, same business address as Malcolm's consulting company. No report distributed to department heads, no meeting minutes. Blue Horizon Creative, $72,000, brand modernization, creative director Ethan Brooks, longtime friend of Nolan. No completed campaign matching invoice scope. For the first time, I saw the pattern without needing to explain it emotionally. The numbers explained themselves. Then came Tessa. Tessa had worked front desk for 6 years before leaving for a job at a vacation rental company in Cannon Beach. She was funny, blunt, and allergic to authority figures who wasted her time. When I called her, I expected hesitation. Instead, she said, "I wondered when someone would ask." We met at a coffee shop outside Astoria because she did not want to be seen near Harbor Lantern. She brought printed emails in a manila folder. The key one was from Malcolm. It instructed front desk staff to mark certain walk-in cash reservations as owner adjustment and remove them from the central booking report after checkout. The language was dressed up as a reporting correction, but Tessa had handwritten notes from the same week showing the guests paid, stayed, and received keys like any other guests. "Why did you keep this?" I asked. "Because it felt dirty," she said, "and because your grandmother never let cash disappear into fog." That email changed the case. Until then, we had suspicious expenses. Now we had revenue being hidden. Marianne treated the email like a hinge. Inflated costs make the business look weak, she explained. Hidden revenue does the same thing from the other direction. Together, they can support a false financial picture. That false picture was what Malcolm had shown the bank. It was also what he used to justify the family continuity agreement. For weeks, we worked quietly. I would finish shifts, go home, scan documents, write timelines, and send clean copies to Marianne through a secure portal. Denise checked property records. Omar refined his table. Tessa wrote a sworn statement about the booking instructions. Marianne arranged for a commercial broker named Paul Sutter to prepare a preliminary valuation based on public property data, historic occupancy, waterfront location, and comparable sales. His estimate landed above $5.6 million. That number mattered. It showed the $240,000 settlement was not a generous family compromise. It was a discount so extreme, it revealed the intent behind the pressure. Malcolm was not asking me to make a sacrifice for stability. He was trying to purchase control of a multi-million-dollar legacy at clearance price. By late summer, Marianne had sorted everything into categories: false financial distress, related party transactions, undisclosed conflicts, retaliation against beneficiary, coercion to transfer voting authority, misrepresentation to lender, each category connected to a clause in Grandma Ruth's protective trust. That was when the hidden advantage began to take shape. Not fully, not yet, but enough for me to understand that Ruth's papers were not sentimental backup. They were designed for exactly this kind of misconduct. Still, Marianne warned me not to confuse progress with victory. "We have enough to notify the trustee," she said. "Not enough to assume the outcome." "What else do we need?" Malcolm's next move. I hated that answer. Because it meant waiting, because it meant letting him continue to think I was isolated, broke, and scared. And I was scared, but I was no longer isolated. That was the emotional shift I didn't expect. Denise was risking her job. Omar was risking his professional reputation. Tessa had no reason to come back into this mess, but she did. Marianne was giving Grandma Ruth's protections a voice. For the first time, I realized this was bigger than my inheritance. If Malcolm succeeded, employees would lose a workplace built on trust. Guests would support a business being quietly drained. My mother's foundation donors would keep seeing her as a champion for women while she helped erase her own daughter from the company another woman built. That thought made me steadier. Not calmer, steadier. By September, Marianne had enough to prepare two things: a confidential notice to Judith Crane, the independent trustee, and a preservation letter to the bank. Both documents were careful. Both avoided accusations beyond what the evidence supported. Both made one thing clear: any attempt to transfer authority away from me would be challenged under Ruth Whitmore's estate documents and protective trust provisions. I printed one final copy of our evidence index for myself. It was no longer a pile of fear. It was a chain. The fake invoice led to the contractor records. The contractor records led to related party payments. The payments led to hidden revenue. The hidden revenue led to false reports. The false reports led to the agreement Malcolm wanted me to sign. For months, he had treated me like someone too emotional to understand business. Quietly, carefully, legally, I had become the one person who could explain exactly what his business was doing. The invitation arrived in a thick navy envelope with silver lettering. Harbor Lantern Legacy Gala, hosted by Harbor Lantern Inns and Reeves Coastal Holdings, Portland, Oregon. Saturday, November 18th. Business leaders, longtime donors, tourism officials, investors, local media, and community partners were invited to celebrate the next generation of leadership. I read that last line 3 times. The next generation. Not the next chapter. Not the Whitmore legacy. The next generation. It was Malcolm's language from beginning to end. Inside the envelope was a printed agenda. Cocktail reception. Presentation honoring Ruth Whitmore. Business outlook. Announcement of Harbor Lantern's strategic future, closing dinner. Nothing in the schedule mentioned me. Nothing mentioned the will. Nothing mentioned the ownership transition. But I knew Malcolm well enough by then to understand that the real agenda was never printed. The following Monday, he called an executive planning meeting. For the first time in weeks, I was invited. That alone made me suspicious. When I entered the conference room, a large presentation board stood beside the projector. Across the top was the new logo for Reeves Coastal Holdings. Below it were professionally designed renderings showing Harbor Lantern properties with updated branding. My grandmother's name appeared only once, at the bottom. Small, as part of a timeline labeled Founding Heritage. Everything after that belonged to Malcolm. He spoke with complete confidence. The hospitality market is changing. Regional partnerships are essential. Investors expect stability. He looked around the room. And stability requires a clear succession. Nobody challenged him. Several department managers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one interrupted. I understood why. He controlled promotions, raises, schedules. Their silence wasn't agreement. It was survival. Then Malcolm reached the final slide. A photograph of Nolan. Suit, tie, professional headshot. Underneath it, future executive director applause followed. Not loud, not enthusiastic, but enough to satisfy Malcolm. I looked at Nolan. He smiled like this had always been inevitable. For a brief second, I wondered whether he truly believed he had earned that title, or whether believing Malcolm had simply become easier than questioning him. After the meeting ended, Malcolm caught up with me in the hallway. I hope you'll support your brother. My brother hasn't inherited Harbor Lantern. His smile never disappeared. This isn't about inheritance anymore. No, it's about leadership. They're the same thing when you're trying to replace me. He laughed softly. You still think this is personal. I wanted to tell him everything. About Marianne, about Judith Crane, about the trust, about the evidence already sitting in organized legal folders. Instead, I remembered Marianne's warning. Let him believe he understands the board. I simply walked away. 3 days later, another envelope appeared in my mailbox at Harbor Lantern. This one contained guest lists. Not complete names, just categories: regional bank executives, tourism board members, state hospitality association, historic preservation donors, commercial lenders, travel journalists, local television, business columnists. Nearly every person Malcolm needed to impress would be in one room. That changed how Marianne looked at the gala. It isn't just a celebration anymore, she said when I met her later that week. It's an evidence opportunity. She spread the invitation across her conference table. If Malcolm publicly represents ownership authority that he doesn't legally possess. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I understood. Public statements mattered, especially when made before lenders, investors, and industry professionals. If he pressures you publicly, Marianne continued, that strengthens the coercion argument. If he announces changes that contradict Ruth's estate documents, she tapped the invitation. He creates independent witnesses. For the first time, the gala looked different, not like a trap, like a stage. The difference depended entirely on preparation. Over the next 2 weeks, Malcolm became almost cheerful. Construction crews polished landscaping. Marketing materials arrived daily. New banners appeared at every Harbor Lantern property. Employees received talking points. The phrase "New Era" appeared everywhere. At one staff meeting, Malcolm said, "Guests love confidence." I noticed he never said truth, only confidence. Meanwhile, I continued documenting ordinary things: internal memos, planning schedules, public announcements, copies of promotional materials describing Reeves Coastal Holdings as Harbor Lantern's future operating structure. Everything stayed within my authorized access. Everything had dates. Everything had context. Marianne wanted chronology, not drama. One afternoon, Denise found me replacing welcome folders in guest rooms. "You're quieter than usual." I've been thinking. About the gala? I nodded. She looked out toward the ocean before speaking. Your grandmother hated grand announcements. I smiled. I remember. She used to say real businesses don't need fireworks. That sentence stayed with me, because Malcolm loved fireworks. The bigger the audience, the stronger he felt. The larger the applause, the more certain he became. He believed public confidence created reality. Grandma believed reality survived after applause disappeared. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Near the end of October, Marianne called. I've spoken with Judith Crane. My heartbeat immediately quickened. And? She cannot intervene based on suspicions. I know. But she is willing to observe. What does that mean? It means if significant representations are made publicly, she wants to hear them herself. I understood immediately. Judith wasn't joining our side. She was protecting the process, exactly as Ruth intended. That made her more valuable than any ally. A week later, I received another email. Final seating assignments, bank executives near the stage, tourism officials beside major donors, media tables facing the presentation screen. My assigned seat was beside Elaine. Not beside management, not beside department heads, not beside the future planning committee. Beside my mother, visible, contained, easy to call forward. Malcolm had planned every detail. He expected me to be exactly where he wanted me when the moment arrived. He expected pressure to work better with 200 witnesses. Driving home that evening, I realized something important. For months, Malcolm had escalated privately. Closed-door meetings, payroll reductions, letters, performance files, private accusations. The gala would be different. Everything that happened there would belong to the public record. That changed the rules. Marianne agreed. We don't improvise. We prepare. Every document was reviewed again, every timeline verified, every witness statement checked. Nothing could depend on emotion. Nothing could rely on memory alone. If Malcolm chose that stage to announce a future he had no authority to create, every word would matter. Not because it embarrassed me, because it would reveal intent. By the first week of November, Harbor Lantern looked ready for a celebration. Fresh flowers, updated brochures, fresh paint, new uniforms. Guests would see a company preparing for its brightest future. Only a handful of people knew another preparation was happening quietly behind the scenes. One involved floral arrangements, speeches, and applause. The other involved organized evidence, legal procedures, and patience. Both were moving toward the same evening. Only one of them was built on the truth. The first letter arrived by certified mail. It wasn't addressed to Clara. It was addressed to Miss Clara Whitmore. That alone told me it wasn't family anymore. It was strategy. Inside was a formal notice from Malcolm's attorney. The letter claimed that my recent actions had interfered with Harbor Lantern's operations, damaged management authority, and created uncertainty among lenders and vendors. It demanded that I stop misrepresenting the company's governance structure and refrain from contacting employees regarding financial matters. If I continued, the letter warned, Harbor Lantern would seek damages for business interference. I read every page twice. Then I smiled. Not because it was funny, because Marianne had predicted almost every paragraph. I scanned the letter before I even made coffee. An hour later, it sat inside our evidence folder under a new section titled Retaliation. When I met Marianne that afternoon, she highlighted 3 sentences. He accuses you of harming the company. She looked up. But he never identifies a single false statement you've made. She tapped another paragraph. And notice this. The letter claimed my questions had disrupted business relationships. But all you've done, Marianne said, is ask for documentation and refuse to sign an agreement. So this helps us? It helps establish pressure. She added it to the chronology. Threat letter, date, delivery method, supporting context, another clean link in the chain. Malcolm didn't stop there. 2 days later, payroll deposited less than half of what I expected. Human Resources apologized, but explained that executive management had suspended several categories of supervisory compensation while my role classification remained under review. I had never heard of such a review. Neither had Denise. Neither had Omar. Yet suddenly, it existed. I paid my rent by moving money from my personal savings. Driving home that night, I realized Malcolm wasn't trying to bankrupt me. He was trying to make me afraid of the next month. Fear works best when it arrives in installments. I documented everything: pay stub, payroll notice, bank deposit, timeline, no anger, just records. A week later, Omar called me from his personal phone. "I found something you should know." We met after work at a quiet diner outside town. He slid a printed reconciliation summary across the table. "I can only show you what I prepared as part of my normal accounting work." I nodded. "I understand." One line immediately caught my attention: Whitmore Preservation Fund withdrawal, $95,000. I frowned. "The Preservation Fund?" Omar nodded. "It wasn't created for operating expenses. Grandma Ruth had established the Whitmore Preservation Fund years earlier to maintain the historic buildings, preserve original architectural features, and finance emergency restoration after storms. Its money wasn't supposed to finance expansion, or consulting, or executive projects. Where did it go?" "I can't speculate." He pointed to another line. "It left the preservation account." The destination required additional authorization records that Omar couldn't legally provide. That was enough. Marianne didn't need guesses, she needed facts. The withdrawal itself was a fact. Later that week, Denise quietly confirmed something else. The preservation work originally scheduled for Whitmore House had been postponed. Again. The money was gone. The repairs were not completed. Another piece fit. Then came the discovery I wasn't prepared for. Marianne requested copies of the authorization paperwork connected to the Preservation Fund through appropriate legal channels available to the estate's beneficiary. Among the documents was a signature page. 2 signatures. Malcolm Reeves. Elaine Reeves. I stared at my mother's name for several seconds. "I thought Malcolm controlled these accounts." "He doesn't," Marianne replied. "Not alone." She explained that because the Preservation Fund originated through Ruth's estate planning, certain withdrawals required additional approval. Elaine had provided it. My mother hadn't simply stood beside Malcolm. She had actively authorized using protected family assets. Whether she understood the consequences or not no longer mattered. The signature was real. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it surprised me, because it removed the last excuse I had been making for her. I had spent months telling myself Malcolm manipulated her. Now I had to accept something harder. She was making choices. Meanwhile, Malcolm continued building his version of reality. Another document surfaced. This time, it was an email sent to Harbor Lantern's primary commercial lender. Through normal correspondence connected to estate matters, Marianne lawfully obtained a copy. It stated that all principal family stakeholders have reached substantial agreement regarding Harbor Lantern's future governance. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. I had never agreed to anything. The email also suggested that any remaining paperwork represented routine implementation rather than ongoing disagreement. It transformed my refusal into invisible paperwork, as though my signature were simply delayed, not withheld. Marianne circled the language. "This is important." "Because it's false?" "Because it is specific. General opinions are difficult to prove. Specific factual statements are easier. Either I had agreed, or I hadn't." The records answered that question. My unsigned family continuity agreement sat in the evidence file. The chronology showed every refusal. The email contradicted reality. Another clean connection. Threat letter, payroll pressure, protected fund withdrawal, false bank representation. One event led naturally to the next. Exactly the pattern Ruth's protective trust described. By early November, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. Months earlier, every new attack felt personal. Now I opened envelopes the same way Marianne did, carefully, patiently, looking for dates, signatures, recipients, supporting documents. Malcolm believed pressure would make me panic. Instead, it changed the way I observed him. Every decision he made answered a question we hadn't known to ask. Every attempt to corner me explained his priorities. Every document expanded the timeline. One afternoon, Marianne spread the entire chronology across her conference table. It stretched nearly the full length of the room. Roof invoice, vendor records, related party payments, cash booking instructions, low settlement offer, performance file, threat letter, payroll restriction, preservation fund withdrawal, false lender communication. She looked at me. "Do you see it now?" I nodded slowly. "I do." "What do you see?" "It isn't a collection of bad decisions." "No. It's one strategy." Exactly. That realization changed the entire case. Malcolm wasn't reacting to me. He was executing a plan. Control the finances, control the narrative, pressure the beneficiary, create artificial urgency, transfer authority, everything fit. Marianne closed the final binder. "We're almost ready." "For what?" She met my eyes. "For the emergency petition." Not because we hoped to use it, because if Malcolm chose the gala to complete his plan, we would already have ours. Driving back to Astoria that evening, I passed Whitmore House just after sunset. Its porch lights glowed exactly the way they had when Grandma Ruth was alive. Guests laughed on the front steps. The American flag moved gently in the wind. Nothing about the building suggested a legal battle was quietly forming around it. I parked for a moment before going home. Months earlier, I had wanted Malcolm to stop. Now I understood something different. He wasn't going to stop. He believed every threat made me weaker. He never imagined each one was making our case stronger. By trying to force me into surrender, he was steadily proving exactly why Grandma Ruth had created protections he never knew existed. The Monday before the gala, Marianne spread 3 folders across her conference table. Unlike the stacks of evidence we had spent months assembling, these folders contained almost no surprises. They were about preparation. "We're done collecting," she said. "Now we protect what we've collected." That distinction mattered. For months, every conversation had centered on finding the next piece of evidence. Now Marianne wanted to make sure none of it could disappear, be challenged as fabricated, or become unusable because we acted too late. She handed me the first folder. "Read the heading." I looked down. "Confidential Notice to Trustee." The name beneath it made my pulse quicken. Judith Crane. Marianne explained every page before letting me read it. "This is not an accusation. It is not a lawsuit. It does not ask Judith to rule against anyone." "So what does it do?" I asked. "It informs the trustee that evidence exists suggesting conditions described in Ruth Whitmore's protective trust may soon require review." Every sentence was measured. There were no emotional descriptions, no dramatic language. Only verified facts supported by documents already organized in our evidence file. The notice referenced the proposed transfer of voting authority, the related party transactions, the retaliation after I refused to sign, the inaccurate communication sent to Harbor Lantern's lender. Each point ended with the same phrase, "Supporting documentation available upon request." Nothing was exaggerated. That was intentional. When Marianne finished reviewing the notice, she placed it inside a sealed envelope. "It goes out today." Watching her seal it felt strangely comforting. For the first time since Grandma Ruth died, someone was using the legal protections she had planned instead of simply talking about them. The second folder contained something equally important. A preservation letter addressed to Harbor Lantern's primary commercial lender. I recognized the bank's logo immediately. "What does this do?" "It asks the bank to preserve all communications regarding governance, ownership, lending discussions, and succession planning." Can they ignore it? They can. But if they receive formal notice and later destroy relevant records, that creates problems they would rather avoid. Again, the language surprised me. It never accused Malcolm of fraud. It never claimed the bank had done anything wrong. It simply informed them that ownership questions were active and that documents should be retained. Marianne smiled. Good lawyers rarely begin by shouting. The third folder was heavier than the others. Emergency petition. I stared at the title for several seconds. I thought we weren't filing anything yet. We aren't. Then why prepare it? Because emergencies rarely announce themselves politely. She opened the draft. Most of it was already complete. The parties, the estate history, the ownership timeline, the legal authorities supporting temporary intervention. Only a few sections remained blank. Current event, immediate harm, requested relief. Those depend on what happens at the gala, Marianne explained. If Malcolm crosses certain lines publicly, we don't want to spend 3 days writing while evidence grows cold. That changed the way I looked at preparation. We weren't planning a dramatic confrontation. We were shortening the distance between misconduct and legal response. Over the next several days, every witness reviewed his or her own statement one final time. Denise verified dates attached to the maintenance photographs. Omar checked every financial summary against the original reconciliation reports. Tessa reread her statement about the removed cash bookings. No one added new information. No one tried to strengthen their story. Marianne insisted on one rule. If you don't clearly remember it, leave it out. Accuracy mattered more than completeness. By Wednesday afternoon, our evidence index filled nearly an entire binder. Each section referenced supporting documents. Each document carried page numbers. Each witness statement pointed to related exhibits. The chaos that had once overwhelmed me had become an organized record. Looking at it, I finally understood something Grandma Ruth had tried to teach me years earlier. Truth becomes stronger when it is organized. Thursday morning, Marianne called. I spoke with Judith. I closed my office door before answering. And? She received the notice. I waited. She appreciates that we followed proper procedure. Will she come? Marianne paused just long enough for me to notice. Yes. The words settled over me slowly. She'll attend the gala? As an observer. Nothing more. That was exactly what I hoped to hear. If Judith appeared as my ally, Malcolm would dismiss her. If she attended as an independent trustee, fulfilling her responsibility, everything changed. Does Malcolm know? No. And he must not. That afternoon, I drove past the hotel, where the gala would be held in Portland. Workers were unloading floral arrangements. A production crew tested lighting inside the ballroom. Large banners displayed Harbor Lantern's lighthouse logo beside the new Reeves Coastal Holdings branding. Everything looked polished, successful, optimistic. It was the image Malcolm wanted the world to remember. On Friday, another email arrived from the event coordinator. Final seating chart. Bank executives in the front section. Historic preservation donors beside community leaders. Regional tourism officials near the stage. Local journalists assigned reserved tables with clear sightlines to the presentation screen. I noticed something else. The independent trustee's name appeared quietly among invited estate advisors. No special introduction, no public role. Exactly as Marianne had planned. That evening we held one final meeting, not to rehearse speeches. There would be none, not to plan dramatic surprises. There would be none of those either. Instead, Marianne walked through possibilities. If Malcolm says nothing about governance, we observe. If he pressures you privately, we document. If he publicly claims authority, he does not possess. She looked directly at me. You stay calm. No arguments. No raised voices. You answer only when necessary. And you let the documents do their work. I nodded. Months earlier, I would have wanted to defend myself. Now I understood that defending myself was no longer the goal. Establishing the truth was. Before leaving, Marianne handed me one final envelope. Inside was a complete copy of our evidence index. If anything unexpected happens, she said, you won't be carrying loose papers. I slipped it into my briefcase beside Grandma Ruth's brass key. The two objects rested next to each other. One had opened a locked drawer. The other represented everything that drawer had quietly protected. Driving home that night, I realized fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape. I wasn't afraid of facing Malcolm anymore. I was afraid of timing. If he chose caution over arrogance, the gala might end with applause instead of accountability. If he stayed disciplined, our legal path would become slower. Everything depended on choices I could not control. For the first time in months, I accepted that. Preparation had reached its limit. The evidence was organized. The trustee had been notified. The bank had received notice. The emergency petition stood ready. Our witnesses knew exactly what to do. Nothing else could be forced. As I laid my suit across the bedroom chair that night, I understood something I hadn't been able to admit before. The gala was never going to decide whether I owned Harbor Lantern. Grandma Ruth's will had already done that. The gala would decide only one thing: whether Malcolm was willing to lie in front of an entire room full of people who could no longer say they hadn't seen it happen. By the time I arrived at the Portland Grand Hotel, the ballroom was already buzzing. Servers moved between groups carrying trays of champagne. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. A giant display behind the stage showed old photographs of Harbor Lantern Inns. Grandma Ruth appeared in several of them, standing beside fresh paint, holding oversized scissors at ribbon cuttings, laughing with employees during Christmas dinners. For a moment, I forgot everything else. I smiled at one photograph where she was wearing the faded denim jacket she loved. She looked proud. Not because the business was growing, because the people around her looked like family. That image disappeared as the presentation screen shifted to a polished promotional video. Now Harbor Lantern was paired with sleek graphics carrying another logo: Reeves Coastal Holdings. That logo stayed on the screen much longer than Ruth's face had. I noticed. So did several longtime employees. Denise caught my eye from across the room. She didn't wave. She simply nodded once. We both knew why we were there. I found my assigned seat beside my mother. Elaine looked elegant in a dark blue dress. She smiled when I sat down. "I'm glad you came." "I never planned to miss it." She reached for my hand. "I hope tonight can be a fresh start." I looked at her for a long moment. Months earlier, I would have believed those words. Now I wondered whether she was comforting herself more than me. "I hope tonight tells the truth," I answered quietly. She looked away. The ballroom slowly filled. I recognized executives from Harbor Lantern's lending bank, representatives from the State Tourism Board, historic preservation donors, local reporters, business owners from across the coast, several former employees, nearly every person Malcolm had spent years trying to impress. Then I saw someone quietly entering through a side door. Judith Crane. Nobody announced her. Nobody escorted her to the front. She simply greeted the event coordinator, accepted a program, and took her assigned seat among estate advisors. Exactly as Marianne had described: independent, unobtrusive, watching. A few minutes later, Marianne arrived as well. She offered only the smallest smile before taking her place several rows behind me. No conversation. No signal. Everything remained ordinary. That was the point. At 7 o'clock sharp, Malcolm walked onto the stage. The applause was polite, confident. He thanked sponsors, recognized community leaders, spoke warmly about Grandma Ruth's vision. His opening was almost beautiful. If I hadn't known everything else, I might have believed every word. Then the presentation shifted. The screen displayed architectural renderings, expansion plans, projected revenue graphs, corporate branding. The words "future leadership strategy" appeared behind him. His voice grew stronger. "Harbor Lantern has always honored tradition." A pause. "But every successful family business eventually embraces responsible transition." He spoke about changing markets, competition, regional partnerships, professional management. Nothing he said was technically false. Not yet. Then he invited Nolan onto the stage. My half-brother walked out to warm applause. He looked nervous, but also proud. Malcolm rested one hand on his shoulder. Nolan represents the next generation of disciplined leadership. Again, applause. Then came the sentence Marianne had warned me about. Our family has reached agreement on a unified transition that will secure Harbor Lantern's future through Reeves Coastal Holdings. I felt my heartbeat slow. Not speed up, slow down, because I knew exactly what had just happened. He had made a factual statement. A statement I knew was false. There had never been family agreement. There had been pressure, threats, documents, an unsigned contract still sitting safely in Marianne's files, but not agreement. Malcolm continued. As of tonight, we move forward together. Together, another lie. He smiled toward my table. Clara. More than 200 faces turned toward me. If you'd join us. The room applauded politely as I stood. I walked toward the stage one step at a time, not because I was uncertain, because I refused to look rushed. Malcolm greeted me with the same public smile he had perfected over years of charity dinners and business luncheons. On a small podium sat a leather folder. I recognized it immediately. Another copy of the family continuity agreement. He leaned toward me just enough that only I could hear him. Don't make a scene. I looked at the folder, then at the audience, then back at him. You already have. He laughed softly into the microphone as though I had made a joke. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, every family has healthy discussions before important decisions. More laughter. Fortunately, those conversations have brought us here. He opened the folder. This simply formalizes what we've already agreed. There it was. Again. Not opinion, not optimism. A direct statement. We had already agreed. No, we had not. He picked up a pen and held it toward me. This belongs in the family. I took neither the pen nor the folder. Instead, I asked one question into the microphone. When did I agree? The ballroom became very quiet. Malcolm smiled without missing a beat. We've all had constructive conversations. That's not what I asked. His expression tightened for the first time that evening. You support Harbor Lantern's future. I support Harbor Lantern. I paused. I have never agreed to transfer my voting rights. Silence spread across the room. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. A reporter near the front lowered his program and reached for a notebook. Malcolm tried to recover immediately. These are merely legal formalities. No, I kept my voice calm. They're ownership documents. His smile became noticeably thinner. Before he could respond, another voice came from the audience. Clear, professional, measured. That distinction is legally significant. Every head turned. Judith Crane had stood. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't dramatic. She simply held her event program in one hand. My name is Judith Crane. She paused long enough for several people to recognize it from the printed guest list. I serve as the independent trustee identified in portions of Ruth Whitmore's estate planning. The room became perfectly still. Malcolm looked genuinely surprised for the first time since I'd known him. Judith continued. I have recently received formal notice that certain governance matters concerning Harbor Lantern are under review. She turned slightly toward Malcolm. Given that review, I strongly advise against representing disputed ownership arrangements as settled fact. No accusations, no speeches, just one precise statement. The effect was immediate. One of the commercial lending executives quietly stood and approached the stage. He spoke calmly enough that nearby guests could still hear. Mr. Reeves, if ownership authority is currently under trustee review, our institution cannot recognize any governance changes announced this evening until those matters are resolved. Another executive from the tourism board closed the folder in front of him. Two reporters began writing quickly. The applause that Malcolm had expected never came. He looked around the room as if searching for someone to restore control. No one moved. No one rescued him. Because there was nothing to rescue. Nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting, no accusations, no public argument. Only one verified statement after another. I looked at the leather folder still lying open between us. The signature line waited exactly where Malcolm had planned. Untouched. Months earlier, that document had felt like a trap. Now it looked like something else, evidence. Not because of what it said, because of where Malcolm had chosen to present it. He believed a crowded ballroom would pressure me into surrender. Instead, it created more than 200 independent witnesses who had just watched him describe a disputed ownership transfer, as though it had already been completed. The gala continued after a brief pause. People still ate dinner. Music eventually returned. Conversations resumed. From a distance, everything almost looked normal. But the room had changed. No one looked at Malcolm the same way anymore. And neither did the people whose signatures mattered far more than applause. For nearly 30 seconds after Judith Crane identified herself, nobody in the ballroom spoke. The silence was heavier than any argument could have been. Malcolm still stood at the podium with one hand resting on the open agreement. The polished confidence he had carried all evening hadn't disappeared, but it had cracked. He recovered quickly. I expected that. People like Malcolm didn't survive by giving up the room. They survived by changing the story. He smiled toward the audience. I think we've had a misunderstanding. Several guests nodded politely. Misunderstandings happen. Fraud sounds much worse. He turned toward me. Clara has always cared deeply about Harbor Lantern. Sometimes that passion makes business conversations feel more personal than they are. There it was again. Not unstable, not irrational, just emotional. The same story. A different audience. Before I answered, Marianne stood from her seat. She didn't rush. She carried one slim binder and walked calmly toward the front of the ballroom. I'm Marianne Cole, she said. I represented Ruth Whitmore during the preparation of her estate documents. Her tone never changed. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to clarify. The event coordinator quietly rolled a presentation monitor closer to the stage after one of the bank executives asked whether supporting documents were available. Marianne nodded. They are. She connected her laptop. The first image appeared. A copy of the family continuity agreement. The signature line for me remained blank. The audience didn't need legal training to understand what that meant. Marianne spoke evenly. Mr. Reeves publicly stated that the family had already reached agreement. She looked toward the screen. This proposed agreement has never been signed by Ms. Whitmore. The lender who had spoken earlier made a brief note. No one applauded, no one interrupted. The room simply watched. Marianne changed slides. The second image showed the preliminary business valuation. The number, more than $5.6 million, appeared beside the proposed settlement of $240,000. No commentary was necessary. The comparison explained itself. One of the tourism board members quietly whispered, "That's quite a gap." Malcolm stepped toward the microphone. Those valuation estimates are speculative. Marianne nodded. They are preliminary? She paused. Which is why they are not the basis of today's concern. Another slide appeared. The North Line restoration invoice. Then Denise's dated photographs of the unchanged roof. Then the vendor sign-in log. No contractor, no crew. No record of work. Denise stood when Marianne asked whether the photographs were hers. Yes. Did you alter them? No. Were those photographs taken before and after the invoice was marked complete? Yes. Did a roof replacement occur? No. Her answers were short, clear, professional. Malcolm tried again. Maintenance projects aren't always visible to every employee. Denise answered before Marianne needed another question. I supervised the property every day that week. Silence. Marianne advanced to the next section. A simple chart prepared by Omar. North Line Restoration. Reeves Strategic Solutions. Blue Horizon Creative. Amounts, dates, descriptions, known relationships. Omar stood only long enough to identify the reconciliation summary as one he had prepared during ordinary accounting work. He never accused anyone. He simply confirmed that the chart accurately reflected Harbor Lantern's financial records. The pattern was now visible. One payment could be explained. 3 connected payments invited harder questions. Malcolm's voice became sharper. Related businesses are common in hospitality. They can be, Marianne replied, when fully disclosed. She moved to the next exhibit, the cash booking email. Tessa walked forward from the audience. She identified the email, confirmed it had been sent by Malcolm, confirmed that completed cash bookings had been removed from internal reporting after guests checked out. Again, there was no argument, only confirmation. One donor sitting near the stage frowned. If revenue was removed, he asked quietly, how were performance reports prepared? Marianne answered carefully. That question deserves a forensic review. She never claimed the conclusion. She let the question settle inside the room. Then came the preservation fund. The screen displayed the withdrawal authorization. $95,000, 2 signatures, Malcolm Reeves, Elaine Reeves. My mother closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She simply stared at her own signature projected larger than life across the ballroom wall. A woman from the Historic Preservation Society looked from the screen to Elaine. Weren't those restricted restoration funds? Elaine opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It was the first time all evening Malcolm answered for her. The funds were reallocated temporarily. Marianne responded immediately. The scheduled restoration did not occur. No raised voice, no accusation, just another verified fact. The room felt smaller now, not because people had moved, because every explanation Malcolm offered was being measured against a document already on the screen. Then Marianne looked toward me. Clara. I stepped beside her. She handed me a printed page. I believe this belongs with your timeline. It was a copy of text messages obtained through Discovery from Tessa's preserved communications with Ethan Brooks regarding gala planning expenses. One exchange included Nolan. Dad says Blue Horizon will handle the event billing. Easier to keep everything in one place. Another message followed 2 days later. We'll invoice Harbor Lantern like the other projects. Nolan stared at the screen. His face lost all color. I didn't mean... He stopped speaking, because intent wasn't the issue anymore. Participation was. The event coordinator quietly confirmed that Blue Horizon Creative had indeed processed portions of the gala's marketing and production billing. No drama, no confrontation, just confirmation. The final exhibit surprised almost everyone except Marianne and me. I reached into my briefcase and removed the small brass key. The room looked confused. It doesn't unlock Harbor Lantern, I said. It unlocked a drawer my grandmother asked me to open, only if someone tried to convince me this business was never really mine. I placed the key beside the binder. Everything you've seen tonight began with this. For a moment, nobody spoke. The little brass key looked insignificant next to financial reports and legal documents. Yet somehow it tied the entire evening together. Grandma Ruth hadn't left me hidden money. She had left me instructions to preserve the truth. Malcolm looked around the ballroom. The applause he expected never arrived. Instead, people began speaking quietly among themselves. The lending officers requested copies of the trustee notice. Historic preservation donors approached Elaine with questions she couldn't answer. Journalists compared notes. Board members exchanged business cards with Marianne. No one shouted, no one celebrated. That made the moment more devastating. Malcolm wasn't being humiliated because someone insulted him. He was watching years of carefully managed credibility dissolve under the weight of records he could not explain away. The false narrative that I was simply emotional had carried him for years. But paper has no emotions. Photographs don't become defensive. Signatures don't exaggerate. Timelines don't lose their temper. For the first time since Grandma Ruth died, the room wasn't deciding whether they believed me. They were deciding what to do with the truth now that they had seen it. As guests slowly stood from their tables, I looked once more at the brass key resting beside the binder. For years, I had thought it was the smallest thing my grandmother left me. That night, I finally understood it had opened the largest door. I barely slept the night after the gala. Not because I regretted what had happened, because I knew the next phase wouldn't be emotional anymore. It would be procedural. Monday morning, Marianne called before 8. The petition is being filed. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Are we asking for ownership? No. What then? Temporary protection. That answer reminded me of something Grandma Ruth used to say. If you protect the house first, you can decide later how to decorate it. We weren't trying to win everything at once. We were trying to stop Malcolm from causing more damage. By noon, the emergency petition had been filed with the probate court. It requested temporary restrictions on any transfer of Harbor Lantern assets or voting authority until the trustee review and financial investigation could be completed. Attached were months of carefully organized exhibits, not opinions, documents, the unsigned family continuity agreement, the Northline invoice, vendor logs, the preservation fund withdrawal, the lender correspondence, witness statements. For the first time, everything we had assembled existed inside an official court record. 2 days later, the judge granted temporary relief. Malcolm remained physically present at Harbor Lantern, but major financial decisions now required independent review. No assets could be transferred. No ownership documents could be executed. No new related party contracts could be approved. When Marianne called with the order, she didn't celebrate. She simply said, "Now the records stay where they belong." That was enough. The court also authorized a forensic accounting review. I had heard the phrase before. I never imagined it would become part of my life. The accounting firm spent weeks reviewing bank records, invoices, vendor agreements, payment approvals, reimbursement requests, payroll adjustments, and electronic accounting logs. They didn't rely on assumptions. They followed the money. Exactly the way Omar had taught me to. The preliminary report arrived almost a month later. Marianne invited me to her office before I read it. "Remember," she said, "this report isn't written to tell a story. It's written to answer questions." I opened the first page, then the second. The number appeared near the middle of the executive summary: $684,000. That was the amount investigators believed had been transferred through unsupported, undisclosed, or improperly documented transactions over several years. I read it again: $684,000. It was almost impossible to imagine. The report broke everything into categories: consulting fees with insufficient documentation, related party vendor payments, unsupported marketing expenditures, preservation fund transfers, cash revenue discrepancies. Each section pointed to supporting records. Nothing relied on guesswork. One discovery hit especially hard. Several payments made through Reeves Strategic Solutions had been used to satisfy personal loan obligations connected to Malcolm's own business ventures. Harbor Lantern money had not simply funded consulting. It had helped pay Malcolm's private debts. Another section traced a large deposit connected to the down payment on a condominium purchased by Nolan. The accounting firm didn't speculate about intent. It simply documented the flow of funds through connected entities before arriving at the final transaction. Seeing Nolan's name there made my chest tighten. I wanted him to be naive. The record suggested something more complicated. The investigation didn't stop with money. Marianne received the complete performance file Malcolm had kept on me after the court ordered relevant employment records preserved. I expected pages of criticism. I wasn't disappointed. Every disagreement, every question, every refusal to sign, every conversation Malcolm considered inconvenient. It was all there. But something unexpected appeared once the investigators compared dates. A timeline. Every negative entry had been created immediately after I challenged something. The roof invoice. A note appeared the next day. My payroll questions. Another entry. The family continuity agreement. A lengthy memorandum about my supposed inability to cooperate. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The file wasn't documenting my behavior. It was documenting Malcolm's retaliation. Marianne laid two timelines beside each other. On the left, my documented concerns. On the right, Malcolm's performance notes. Every major complaint I raised was followed within days by another written criticism of my character. She tapped the pages. This isn't personnel management. It's witness preparation. For months, Malcolm had insisted the file proved I was unstable. Now it demonstrated something entirely different. He wasn't recording objective observations. He was manufacturing a history. Ironically, the document he expected to destroy my credibility became one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting retaliation. Judith Crane reviewed the audit, the employment records, and the estate documents over several weeks. When her written determination finally arrived, Marianne invited me to read it in her office. I recognized Ruth's name before anything else. The determination concluded that sufficient evidence existed to trigger review under the protective trust provisions established by Ruth Whitmore. The language remained careful. It did not declare Malcolm guilty. That decision belonged elsewhere. But it confirmed that the documented conduct met the conditions requiring trustee intervention. Self-dealing, coercive efforts directed toward the beneficiary, material concerns regarding fiduciary responsibility. The protective trust was officially activated. The additional 18% voting interest moved under trustee authority in accordance with Ruth's instructions. Combined with my existing rights under the will, the balance of control shifted. For the first time since Grandma died, Malcolm no longer controlled Harbor Lantern. Not because I had defeated him, because Ruth had planned for the possibility that someone like him might exist. A temporary management order followed. The court appointed me acting managing owner while litigation continued, subject to regular reporting requirements and trustee oversight. It wasn't absolute power. Honestly, I was grateful for that. After everything I had witnessed, accountability felt comforting. Civil litigation moved forward. Claims for restitution, breach of fiduciary duty, financial recovery, regulatory reporting. Separate criminal investigators requested portions of the forensic audit. Marianne warned me not to speculate about outcomes. Courts decide guilt, she reminded me. Our job was to preserve the truth. As the months passed, settlements began resolving portions of the civil case. Funds were ordered returned. Improper transfers unwound where possible. Insurance carriers became involved. Banks updated governance records. Every step was slower than television dramas make it look, but every step moved in the same direction. One afternoon, I unlocked Grandma Ruth's office again. The same desk waited beside the window, the same drawer, the same brass lock. I placed the small key on the desktop. Months earlier, it had felt like the beginning of a mystery. Now it felt like the closing of a promise. Grandma hadn't left me a shortcut. She hadn't hidden a miracle. She had left instructions, legal protections, and the expectation that I would have the patience to use them correctly. Standing alone in that office, I realized the keys to Harbor Lantern had never truly belonged to Malcolm. He had only been holding them. The law had finally returned them to the person my grandmother had trusted all along. Nearly 11 months after the Harbor Lantern Legacy Gala, the last major court order was entered. I wasn't in the courtroom alone. Marianne sat beside me. Omar and Denise were there. Several longtime Harbor Lantern employees quietly occupied the back row. No one smiled. This wasn't a celebration. It was the conclusion of a process that had taken nearly 2 years. The judge approved the final civil settlement and accepted the restitution plan recommended after the forensic accounting. The court ordered substantial financial restitution based on the documented losses identified during the investigation. Malcolm was permanently removed from every management role connected to Harbor Lantern Inns. He was prohibited from serving in fiduciary positions involving trust assets or family-controlled businesses for the period established by the court. Separate criminal proceedings ended with a negotiated resolution that included probation, financial penalties, mandatory restitution, and professional restrictions. When the hearing ended, Malcolm didn't look at me. For years, he had controlled every room he entered. That morning, he walked out carrying nothing. The keys had never really belonged to him. My mother faced different consequences. Elaine resigned from every leadership position connected to the Whitmore Charitable Foundation within weeks of the gala. The board accepted her resignation after reviewing the findings concerning the preservation fund. She also agreed to financial restitution connected to the unauthorized use of protected assets. Because she had approved transactions while acting in a fiduciary capacity, the court barred her from serving in similar fiduciary roles for the period ordered. She lost more than a title. She lost the reputation she had spent decades building. I never celebrated that. I couldn't. She was still my mother. Nolan's outcome was different again. The investigators concluded that he had benefited financially from the structure Malcolm created and had participated in related transactions. He was required to cooperate fully with investigators and return financial benefits connected to those arrangements. His future at Reeves Coastal Holdings disappeared before it had truly begun. Several months later, he asked if we could meet. We chose a quiet cafe halfway between Portland and Astoria. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. "I should have asked questions," he said. "Yes. I believed Dad. I know. I didn't think—" He stopped. I didn't finish the sentence for him. There are moments when another person has to carry the weight of their own words. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. "I believe you are." He looked relieved. Then he asked the question I had expected. "Can we be family again?" I sat quietly before answering. "I don't know." His eyes dropped. "I've forgiven enough to stop carrying anger." I spoke carefully. "But forgiveness isn't the same as trust." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I hope someday we can build something honest. But we can't build it on pretending none of this happened." For the first time in years, our conversation contained no manipulation, only consequences. A week later, my mother wrote me a letter. Not an email, not a text message, a handwritten letter. She apologized for every document she signed without asking enough questions. She admitted she had confused keeping peace with doing what was right. She never asked me to erase the past. She only asked whether one day we might have coffee together. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my desk. I didn't answer immediately. Healing deserved honesty too. Harbor Lantern changed more during the following year than it had in the previous decade. Not because I wanted to erase the past, because I wanted to make repeating it impossible. Every related party transaction now required independent disclosure. Financial reports were reviewed by outside accountants. Board meetings produced written minutes available to every voting member. Employees received anonymous reporting channels. Vendor bidding became transparent. No family member received special authority simply because of a last name. The policies weren't built on distrust. They were built on accountability. Whitmore House reopened after the delayed restoration was finally completed using the preservation fund for its original purpose. The old cedar porch was repaired. Historic windows were restored. Grandma Ruth's office remained almost exactly as she had left it. Only one addition appeared on the wall. A framed statement that every new employee read during orientation. "Integrity protects a business long after profits are forgotten." Underneath it was Ruth Whitmore's name. With Mary Ann's encouragement, I also established the Ruth Whitmore Hospitality Scholarship. Each year it supports students who want careers in hospitality management, but cannot afford the education. The scholarship doesn't ask applicants about family wealth, only character. That felt like something Grandma would have loved. One quiet afternoon, almost a year after the court proceedings ended, I unlocked the drawer in Ruth's old desk one last time. Inside was nothing new. The papers had already been archived. The documents had served their purpose. Only the brass key remained. I held it in my hand for a long time. When I was younger, I thought the key protected an inheritance. Later, I believed it protected legal documents. Now I understood what Grandma had really left me. Not money, not property, not even Harbor Lantern. She left me permission to trust the truth, even when everyone around me insisted on a different story. That was the greatest inheritance of all. Before locking the drawer, I placed the key inside a small glass display box on the bookshelf in my office. A simple plaque sat beneath it. "The truth opens what fear cannot." Guests sometimes ask about it. Employees sometimes notice it during meetings. I always smile before answering. "It's a reminder," I tell them. "A business isn't protected by locks. It's protected by people willing to do the right thing." When I leave Whitmore House each evening, I usually stop on the front porch for a moment. The lantern hanging above the entrance still burns every night. Grandma used to say it wasn't there to help people find the building. It was there to remind them someone inside would welcome them honestly. For years, I thought Harbor Lantern belonged to my family. Then I thought it belonged to whoever controlled the paperwork. I know better now. Harbor Lantern belongs to the values that built it. The truth, responsibility, courage, the people who choose them. The law eventually gave me the authority to lead. But freedom came earlier. Freedom arrived the day I stopped living inside Malcolm's version of who I was. The lantern still shines every evening. Only now, when I look at its light, I no longer see the life someone tried to take from me. I see the future I was finally free to build.